I stood at the ATM, sunlight burning my back, my finger hovering above the keypad as my son's laugh echoed behind me. Don't forget your PIN, old woman. The words sliced deeper than my arthritis ever could. I had given him life, taught him to write his name, balanced budgets to feed him, and now, in front of strangers, he called me a burden. After 71 years of holding this family together, I was nothing more than an obstacle with a wallet. Wait. Before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. The line at the ATM curled out from the side of the strip mall bank like a snake, bodies shifting in the heat, everyone impatient to get their cash and move on. The Arizona sun leaned hard on Patricia Dawson's shoulders, the same way her arthritis pressed into her knuckles whenever she tried to grip something tighter than a pencil. She inched forward with her purse clutched close, rehearsing the numbers in her mind, steady as she always did. 4, 7, 1, 9. When her turn came, she stepped up, ignoring the weight of eyes behind her. The keypad gleamed in the afternoon glare. She pressed the first digit, her fingers stiff, her joints screaming. The machine beeped. She paused, shifted her hand, pressed again. Another beep. She felt her body tighten. She knew the rhythm was too slow. Behind her, Mark let out a laugh. Low, sharp, cruel. Don't forget your PIN, old woman. The words cut deeper than the arthritis ever had. Elena, standing at his side in her oversized sunglasses, laughed too. The kind of laugh meant not for humor, but for ridicule. Maybe she should keep it written on a post-it, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Patricia didn't look back. She refused. Her finger hovered over the keypad as if she could shut out the sound of them. She pressed the last digit and waited. The screen flickered, approved the transaction, and finally spat out the bills. She tucked the cash carefully into her wallet, every movement deliberate, every detail precise. Katie, lingering a step behind her parents, shifted uncomfortably. Patricia could feel the girl's eyes burning holes through them. Anger, disappointment, shame, all twisted together in a 15-year-old's silence. Patricia straightened, smoothed the front of her blouse, and turned. She didn't grant her son the satisfaction of a glare or a word. Instead, she walked past him, chin high, her footsteps firm against the pavement. "Next time, Mom," Mark called after her, smug grin stretching wider. "I'll just do it for you." Patricia kept moving. She would not give him the ground he wanted. That evening, back in the cool stillness of her ranch-style home, the humiliation lingered like smoke after a fire. She set her purse on the table, sat down slowly, and pulled out the small notebook she kept tucked inside. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every payment neatly recorded in her compact, precise handwriting. She flipped through pages, each line a testament to her discipline, her order. A knock rattled the back door. Debbie Klein, her neighbor and old friend, leaned in with a smirk. She carried a tray of lemonade, as though she'd been waiting for Patricia to return from errands. "You looked like you were about to swat a fly back there," Debbie said, sliding the tray onto the counter. "What did he say this time?" Patricia hesitated, lowering herself into the chair with a sigh. "He thinks I'm slipping. Mocked me right there in line. Don't forget your pin, old woman." Debbie snorted, shaking her head as she poured 2 glasses. "You? Forget a PIN? That man has no idea who he's dealing with." Patricia pressed her lips together, staring at her open notebook. The rows of numbers glimmered beneath the lamplight. Order, clarity, permanent. "He's convinced I'm weak. That's the problem." Debbie slid a glass across the table and lifted her own. "You don't forget, Pat. You record. That's what keeps you stronger than all of them. He wants you to stumble so he can grab the reins." Patricia sipped the lemonade, the tartness cutting through the lump in her throat. A breeze drifted through the kitchen window, rattling the blinds. Her humiliation began to harden, crystallizing into something sharper, heavier. She closed the notebook and placed her hand firmly on its cover. The laughter at the ATM still echoed in her ears, but it no longer sounded like mockery. It sounded like a challenge. Outside, the desert sun sank low, throwing long shadows across the kitchen wall. Patricia's jaw set, her mind already moving to places Mark didn't know she could go. She whispered, almost to herself, but loud enough for Debbie to catch. "He thinks he knows my numbers. He doesn't know me." Debbie leaned back, her eyes narrowing, as though she already sensed where Patricia's thoughts were headed. "Then maybe it's time," she said, "to change the game." Patricia's fingers drummed once on the notebook cover. A plan, still unshaped, flickered in her mind like a spark catching in dry brush. She didn't know every step yet, but she knew one thing for certain. The next time her son reached for her money, his hand would close around nothing. The next morning, Patricia sat at her dining room table, sunlight cutting through the blinds in sharp bars across her ledger. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator, and that quiet made the crinkle of the envelope in her hands feel louder than it should. The bank statement had come a day early, tucked neatly in the mailbox as though daring her to open it before she'd finished her coffee. She slid it open with the letter knife her late husband had once used for bills. The paper slid out smooth, official, smelling faintly of ink and machinery. She unfolded it, laid it flat against the table, and began to scan, line by line. At first, the charges looked routine. Gas stations, grocery store totals she recognized. But then the numbers began to blur into something different. Withdrawals larger than she remembered making, odd times of night when she would have been asleep, charges at restaurants she hadn't set foot in. Her eyes narrowed as she traced each line, her pencil tapping a steady rhythm against the edge of the page. Then she saw it. A purchase from an upscale boutique downtown, the kind of store she had never walked into in her life. A store Elena loved, the one she had bragged about after some fundraiser. Patricia's lips pressed into a thin line. The date and amount fit too neatly into the puzzle already forming in her head. Her heart thudded once, slow and heavy. She turned the page, and more charges stood out. Weekends in Scottsdale. Online purchases she had no memory of authorizing. Withdrawals so regular they almost looked like a paycheck, except flowing the wrong way. Footsteps padded softly down the hall. Katie appeared, pajama-clad, her hair pulled into a messy bun. She hesitated in the doorway, eyes flicking from the papers on the table to her grandmother's stiff shoulders. "Morning," Patricia said, her voice carefully even. Katie slid into the chair opposite her, lowering her voice. "Grandma, you don't usually get mail this early." Patricia didn't answer right away. She rotated the page, sliding it toward the girl. Katie bent closer, her young brow furrowed as she scanned the transactions. Her lips parted when she reached the boutique charge. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Dad's been using your card." Patricia inhaled through her nose, steady and controlled, as though exhaling too quickly might shatter the composure she'd fought to build. "So it seems." She reached for the copy machine she kept in the corner, a relic from her years as principal, still sharp and dependable. One by one, she fed the pages through, making duplicates with the crisp snap of paper and the steady hum of the machine. Katie fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve. "He's not going to admit it. He'll just say you forgot again." Patricia looked up sharply, locking eyes with her granddaughter. "I don't forget," she said. The words were flat, anchored in the certainty of someone who'd spent decades keeping others accountable. The girl's lips tugged into the faintest grin, a private flicker of loyalty. By late afternoon, Patricia had her copies neatly stacked in a manila folder, clipped and labeled. She tucked her notebook beside them, aligning the edges perfectly. Numbers told a story, and she intended to make sure this one was read aloud. At 5 sharp, Alan Brooks arrived, knocking once before letting himself in, like he had for years. He wore a navy suit despite the heat, his tie loosened but his expression crisp, professional. He set his briefcase on the table and pulled out his reading glasses. "You sounded urgent," he said. Patricia slid the folder across the table, her hands steady. "I need you to look at these." Alan flipped through the pages, his brows tightening as he scanned each charge. When he reached the boutique purchase, he paused, then looked up, his mouth a firm line. "This isn't sloppiness," he said. "This is theft." Patricia said nothing, only folded her hands in front of her, the way she had in countless parent-teacher meetings when waiting for the truth to surface. Alan leaned back in his chair, tapping the folder with the flat of his palm. "Then let's build a case." Patricia's gaze drifted to the window, where the desert sky was shifting to dusk, colors bleeding red and gold across the horizon. She felt the weight of her son's laughter still gnawing at her ribs, but underneath it, the folder sat heavy on the table, proof that his arrogance had left tracks. Her humiliation had transformed into evidence. The Dawson household never carried much peace when Mark barreled through the door, and that evening was no different. The slam echoed down the hallway, rattling a frame on the wall. His heavy footsteps struck the tile like gunfire until he appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, jaw tight, his shirt clinging damp with sweat. "Why's the card frozen?" His voice cracked like a whip, too loud for the small room. Patricia didn't startle. She was seated at the table with her notebook open, her glasses perched low, a pen poised above the neat grid of numbers she'd kept all her life. She looked up, her eyes steady, and let a faint smile pull at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe," she said evenly, "you forgot the PIN." Mark blinked, caught off guard by the sharpness in her tone. His mouth opened, closed, then twisted into a snarl. "Don't play games with me, Mom. Elena and I couldn't even check out at the store today. Do you know how humiliating that was?" Right on cue, Elena appeared behind him, sunglasses still perched on her head though the sun had set hours ago. Her lips were pursed, her tone shrill. "We need access. This is family money. You can't just shut us out like that." Patricia lowered her gaze without answering, the pen scratching across the paper in crisp strokes. She marked the date, the time, the note. Account access suspended. Her handwriting was calm, deliberate, unbothered by the storm in front of her. The silence stretched, broken only by the steady scrape of pen against paper. Katie, seated at the end of the table with her homework open, bit the inside of her cheek to keep from smiling. She ducked her head quickly, hiding the flicker of satisfaction behind the curtain of her hair. Mark slammed a fist against the table, rattling the lemonade glasses still sitting from Debbie's earlier visit. "Don't act like this is some big mystery. We've always shared accounts. You've trusted me for years." Patricia finally looked up, her expression unyielding. "I trusted you to respect what wasn't yours," Elena scoffed. "This is ridiculous. She's writing in that damn notebook like it's the Bible." Katie's pencil paused mid-sentence. Her eyes darted to her grandmother, then back to her father. She didn't say anything, but her posture screamed alignment. Her loyalty was shifting, and Mark seemed too consumed by his fury to notice. The back door creaked open. Debbie stepped inside carrying her tablet, her voice carrying the unhurried rhythm of someone who didn't care if she was interrupting. "Evening, folks." Quite the ruckus. She set the tablet on the counter, eyes twinkling as they flicked from Mark to Patricia. Mark rounded on her. "You got something to say, neighbor?" Debbie leaned against the counter, folding her arms, unfazed by his anger. "Only that power doesn't start with yelling. It starts with PINs and with power, you know?" She gave Patricia a knowing look. Patricia's pen moved again, slow and deliberate, as though carving the words into stone. The fury in the room pressed in like desert heat before a storm, but she refused to rise to it. Elena threw up her hands. "This is insane. We're her family. We deserve access." Patricia set her pen down, folding the notebook shut with a quiet thump. She looked at Elena, then at her son. "Deserve is a dangerous word," she said softly. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt thick, heavy with all the things that had gone unspoken for years. Mark's face reddened, his fists clenching and unclenching. He looked at his mother as though trying to decide if the woman in front of him was the same one he'd mocked at the ATM just days before. He didn't recognize this stillness, this unshakable calm. Debbie finally broke the silence, her tone sharp with amusement. "Maybe it's time you two realized Pat doesn't forget." She prepares. Katie's lips twitched, and she lowered her gaze quickly, hiding the grin threatening to break free. Mark took a step closer to the table, his voice dropping into something darker. "If you think this ends with you shutting me out, you're wrong." Patricia met his stare, unflinching, her hands resting firmly on the closed notebook. Patricia didn't sleep that night. She sat in her armchair, notebook balanced on her lap, the soft tick of the grandfather clock punctuating each thought. Mark's threat still rang in her ears, but instead of fear, it hardened into resolve. She was finished being mocked, finished being siphoned, finished being treated like an old vault someone else could rattle open. At sunrise, she was waiting at the bank doors. The desert morning was still cool, the sky washed in pale lavender. When Alan arrived, tie already knotted, briefcase in hand, he found her seated on the bench outside, her folder clutched tight. "You're early," he said, unlocking the branch with his keycard. "I don't intend to waste another day," Patricia replied. rising with surprising steadiness. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered to life. Alan guided her to his office where the computer hummed awake. "All right, Pat," he said, fingers poised above the keyboard. "Where do we start?" Her voice didn't waver. "Every pin, every account, change it all." And so they began. Patricia dictated new sequences, numbers chosen with precision, anniversaries that mattered only to her, dates no one else would guess. Alan entered them one by one, the system pinging with each successful reset. By the time they finished, every account bore a new lock. Next came the accounts themselves. Alan walked her through, opening a brand new checking account in her name alone. No joint access, no shared signatures. Patricia watched as the paperwork printed, her pen moving smoothly across the dotted lines. The air in the office grew lighter with every stroke, as though she were cutting away invisible chains. Alan leaned back, smiling faintly. "We'll also reroute your Social Security direct deposits straight into this account. No more middle stops." Patricia's lips curved upward for the first time in days. Good. By mid-morning, she had a fresh stack of documents, shiny new debit cards on the way, and a new set of online logins sealed tight with passwords even her sharpest students could never have cracked back in the day. Back at home, Patricia spread the papers across the dining table like a general laying out battle plans. Katie hovered beside her, curiosity bright in her eyes. "What's all this?" the girl asked. Patricia handed her a canceled check, the old joint account now marked closed. "This is what it looks like when someone learns not to touch what isn't theirs." Katie's grin grew, sly and proud. "So, he can't touch you anymore?" Patricia met her granddaughter's gaze. "Not a dime." The house phone rang late that afternoon, Elena's voice shrill and sharp on the line. Patricia didn't bother answering. It went to voicemail. Seconds later, Elena's voice filled the kitchen. "This is insane, Pat. We just tried to call the bank. They said we don't have access anymore. We're your family, not criminals." Patricia pressed the button to delete the message before it could finish. The machine beeped, erasing Elena's fury into silence. Katie, leaning against the counter, laughed under her breath. "Guess the bank told her no." Patricia returned to her chair, setting her notebook atop the fresh paperwork. The afternoon sun streamed in through the blinds, casting bright stripes across the table. For the first time in years, the money in her accounts felt like hers again, untouchable, safe. That night, as she prepared for bed, she paused at the mirror. Her reflection stared back at her, older, lined, but with a steel glint in her eyes that hadn't been there yesterday. She wasn't just protecting her finances, she was reclaiming control of her life, one number at a time. Down the hall, the phone rang again. This time, Mark's voice thundered on the machine. "You think you've won something here? This isn't over, Mom. You hear me? It's not over." Patricia stood in the darkened hallway, listening to his rage spill out of the speaker. But instead of dread, she felt the weight of her new cards and passwords locked in her desk drawer. The fortress was hers now. She pressed the delete button. Beep. Silence. The following Saturday morning, Patricia cleared the dining table, spreading out her paperwork like puzzle pieces. She had slept soundly for the first time in months, but as she woke to the desert sun blazing through her blinds, she realized she was not finished. Closing accounts was one thing, fortifying them was another. A knock on the back door came right on time. Debbie Klein stepped in with her tablet tucked under her arm, a mischievous grin plastered across her face. "Ready to go from Fort Knox to digital Fort Knox?" Patricia adjusted her glasses. "I want this airtight. No cracks. No way back." And Debbie set her tablet down, pulling up banking apps and settings Patricia had never bothered with before. "All right. First step. Fingerprint-only login. No more typing numbers he could have watched over your shoulder." Patricia hesitated for only a moment before pressing her thumb against the sensor on her phone. The device chimed, scanning, locking in the ridges of her print. A strange surge of pride ran through her. Her fingerprint, her identity, no one else's. "Now," Debbie continued, "two-factor authentication. That means even if someone guesses your password, they'll need a code texted straight to your phone, which, I assume, you don't let anyone borrow." Patricia chuckled dryly. "The last time Mark borrowed my phone was when his broke. He used it to order pizza and charged it to my card." Debbie smirked. "Well, those days are gone." She tapped through menus. entering Patricia's number, setting recovery codes, writing everything down in the neat notebook Patricia had waiting. Together, they built walls higher than Mark could ever climb. By afternoon, Patricia leaned back, feeling both drained and exhilarated. She had taken control in ways she never thought she'd need to, and yet the weight on her chest had lifted. That evening, the storm arrived. The front door swung open hard enough to rattle the picture frames again. Mark stormed in, red-faced, Elena trailing behind him like a shadow armed with venom. Patricia didn't flinch. She sat in her chair, notebook open beside her, Debbie still present at the kitchen counter, sipping tea with the air of someone watching a show unfold. Mark's eyes darted to the papers, to Patricia, to Debbie, then back again. "You can't do this." His voice cracked against the walls. "This is my access too." Patricia's head turned slowly, her expression calm, almost amused. "Watch me." The words landed heavy, colder than the air conditioning. Elena stepped forward, her voice sharp and desperate. "You're cutting off family. Do you even hear yourself? What kind of mother does this?" Katie, who had been leaning in the doorway with arms crossed, finally spoke. Her voice was quiet but carried more weight than shouting could. "She's not cutting off family. She's cutting off thieves." The room fell silent for a beat. Elena's face blanched, then flushed deep red. Mark's hands balled into fists. "You little—" he started, but Patricia rose slowly from her chair, her posture as straight and commanding as it had been the day she retired as principal. "You will not speak to her that way," she said, her voice like iron. "Not in my house." Mark's jaw worked, but no words came. He stared at her, his expression torn between outrage and disbelief. Patricia reached for her phone, holding it up as though it were a weapon. "Every number is mine now. Every PIN, every password, every lock. You will find nothing but closed doors." Debbie chuckled into her teacup. "She's not wrong, kiddo. You're locked out tighter than a Vegas vault." Katie's eyes glimmered, caught between fear and pride. For once, she saw her grandmother not as fragile, but as fierce. Mark lunged forward, but Patricia didn't retreat. She stood her ground, chin high, eyes blazing. For a split second, mother and son stared each other down, the air charged like the sky before monsoon rain. Mark finally spat a curse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Elena lingered, her voice trembling with fury. "You'll regret this. You'll regret every second of this." Then she followed him into the night. Patricia sat back down, her pulse steady, her hand resting atop her notebook. Katie moved closer, slipping into the chair beside her, eyes wide. "You're really not afraid of him, are you?" the girl whispered. Patricia looked at her granddaughter, then at Debbie, then back to the door where the echo of Mark's footsteps was fading into the desert night. "No," she said softly, more to herself than anyone else. "Not anymore." The summons arrived in a stiff white envelope stamped Superior Court of Maricopa County. Patricia opened it at the kitchen table, Katie watching from across the room. Inside, the words leapt out in bold: "Petition for guardianship and power of attorney." Her son was trying to have her declared incompetent. Patricia set the papers down carefully, as though they might shatter if handled too roughly. For a long moment she only stared at them, the weight pressing against her chest like a stone. Then, slowly, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't defeat either. "He's really that desperate," she murmured. Katie's eyes widened. "He wants control over you?" Patricia reached for her pen, jotting the date in her notebook. Her voice was steady. "He wants power. He's about to learn what it feels like not to get it." The evaluation took place 2 weeks later in a cool office that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. A psychiatrist in a gray blazer welcomed Patricia with a polite smile. "Mrs. Dawson, I just need to ask you a few questions, all right?" Patricia sat with her notebook in her lap, her back straight. "Ask whatever you need." The doctor began with memory tests, lists of words, short math problems, recalling details after a brief distraction. Patricia answered each one cleanly, her tone calm, her eyes sharp. "Can you tell me today's date?" the doctor asked. Patricia didn't glance at her notebook. "September 12th. It's my neighbor's birthday. I baked her a cake last year." The doctor raised his eyebrows, impressed. As the session went on, her pen never stopped moving. She jotted every question, every response, documenting with the same meticulous order she'd kept for decades. When the doctor finally leaned back in his chair, he was smiling. "Mrs. Dawson, I can assure you, you're sharper than most people 20 years younger." Patricia closed her notebook with a quiet snap. "Tell that to my son." The hearing room was smaller than Patricia expected, but it felt like a stage. The wooden benches creaked as people shifted. Debbie and Katie sat in the back row, side by side. Katie tense, Debbie relaxed, legs crossed, amusement flickering at the corners of her mouth. Mark stood at the petitioner's table, his suit too tight around his shoulders, sweat beading at his temple. Elena sat stiffly beside him, whispering furiously whenever she thought no one was watching. Patricia took her place at the opposite table, Alan beside her, calm and collected. Her manila folder of records sat before her like a shield. The judge, a gray-haired woman with reading glasses perched low on her nose, glanced at the paperwork. "Mr. Dawson, you claim your mother is no longer capable of handling her finances?" Mark straightened, trying for authority. "Yes, Your Honor. She's been forgetful, confused. She froze our family accounts without reason. We can't pay bills? Can't function?" Patricia's mouth twitched at the word family. She kept her hands folded neatly atop her notebook. The judge turned her gaze toward her. "Mrs. Dawson, do you have anything to present?" Patricia rose slowly, her notebook under her arm. She laid it on the table, flipping it open with steady hands. Line after line of flawless handwriting gleamed under the overhead. Lights, dates, amounts, sources, cross-referenced with bank statement, all in perfect order. "I have documented every transaction for the past 20 years, she said evenly. "Every deposit, every withdrawal. I can account for each discrepancy." Alan slid forward copies of the statements they'd prepared. The judge scanned them, her eyes narrowing as she flipped page after page. Mark shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his collar. She's obsessive. "This doesn't prove—" The judge cut him off with a raised hand. "What it proves, Mr. Dawson, is that your mother is anything but incompetent. This is better record keeping than I see in most accountants' offices from the back." Debbie let out a low chuckle that turned heads. She waved her hand innocently when Mark glared at her. The judge set down the papers and looked squarely at Mark. "You brought this petition without basis. I strongly advise you to reconsider your motives moving forward." Patricia sat back down, her heart steady, her hands resting calmly on her notebook. Across the room, her son's face was red, his mouth twisted, the first real cracks showing in his arrogance. Patricia's kitchen became a war room. Stacks of statements lined the table, each page annotated in her neat cursive. She had pulled every withdrawal she hadn't made, every boutique charge, every late-night transfer. By the end of the week, the paper trail looked less like bank paperwork and more like a map of betrayal. Alan sat across from her, sleeves rolled up, a yellow legal pad brimming with timelines. "Here's the sequence," he said, sliding the pad across the table. "Every transfer corresponds to a deposit into Mark's account within 24 hours, some within an hour. It's not coincidence. It's siphoning." Patricia adjusted her glasses, scanning the neat columns. She tapped her pen against a charge from a Scottsdale steakhouse. "That's the night he told me he and Elena were eating at home. They were stealing from me while lying to my face." Katie hovered at the doorway, arms crossed, eyes shadowed. "You have to tell the judge," she said quietly. Patricia didn't look up. "We will. But we'll do it right. With proof no one can deny." Debbie arrived with her tablet, as always, smirking as she slid into a chair. "I pulled digital logs," she said, tapping the screen. "Location data from online logins. Guess whose phone was logged into your account the same night as those withdrawals?" She turned the tablet toward Patricia. "Mark Dawson, plain as day." Patricia allowed herself a small breath. The pieces were falling together with precision that would make any principal proud. When the next hearing came, the air in the courtroom was heavier, more charged than before. Mark and Elena looked frayed at the edges, Mark's tie askew, Elena's makeup smudged from lack of sleep. Across the aisle, Patricia's papers were aligned in perfect order. Alan calm beside her, Debbie and Katie in the back row, silent but steady. The judge adjusted her glasses. "Mrs. Dawson, you said you had further evidence to present." Patricia rose, holding the folder to her chest. She stepped forward and placed it on the clerk's desk, opening it with deliberate care. These are records of every unauthorized withdrawal from my accounts, she said, cross-checked with bank statements, annotated with dates and receipts. Alan followed, handing the legal pad of timelines to the judge. Each of these withdrawals corresponds with a transfer into Mr. Dawson's personal accounts. The amounts matched to the dollar. The judge leaned forward, studying the pages. Her brows furrowed as she flipped through line after line of identical pattern. Mark shot to his feet. "This is twisted!" "She's confused. She's mixing things up." But before he could finish, Katie's voice rang out from the witness stand. She had volunteered to testify, her hands clasped tightly together. "He used her PIN. I saw him. He told me not to say anything." Her voice cracked, but she pushed on. "He laughed about it. Said Grandma wouldn't even notice." The silence in the room was deafening. Elena's face went pale. Debbie let out a low chuckle from the back, shaking her head. "Digital footprints never lie, sweetheart," she muttered just loud enough for those nearby to hear. Patricia returned to her seat, her face calm, almost serene. She had no need for theatrics. The paper spoke louder than any words could. Mark's bravado began to crumble. His hands trembled as he shuffled through his own paperwork, muttering to Elena under his breath. She avoided his eyes, shrinking into her chair. The judge set the documents down with a sharp thud. "Mr. Dawson, this is deeply troubling." Her gaze was stern, unyielding. "You brought this court here to question your mother's competence. What I see instead is a pattern of exploitation." Mark's lips parted, but no sound came. Patricia folded her hands neatly atop her notebook. She had spent her life preparing students for exams, preparing herself for retirement, preparing for everything. And now, she had prepared a case her son could not wriggle free from. The courtroom was cool, too cool, the air conditioning humming against the desert heat pressing outside. Patricia sat at her table, papers aligned, notebook centered, glasses polished until they caught the light. She had the bearing of a teacher ready to grade an exam, calm and precise. Across from her, Mark slouched beside Elena, his jaw working, his suit rumpled. He kept drumming his fingers against the polished wood as though it were the only rhythm he could still control. The judge entered, the gavel striking once. "This hearing is now in session." Mark stood immediately, voice pitched with false earnestness. "Your Honor, I was only helping. My mother has been struggling, forgetting numbers, losing track of bills. I stepped in because I care about her well-being." Patricia's lips pressed into a line. The words, "forgetting numbers," echoed like a cruel parody of that moment at the ATM. She opened her notebook slowly, the sound of the spine cracking sharp in the quiet room. "Your Honor," she said, rising with deliberate grace, "I've documented every cent, and I brought the receipts." She held out a thick envelope. Inside, the clerk revealed months of statements, annotated and cross-checked with her careful handwriting. The judge scanned the first page, brow furrowing. Patricia continued, voice calm but edged with steel. "The withdrawals he calls helping coincide with boutique purchases, casino transfers, and restaurant tabs that were never mine." Mark scoffed, his hands spreading wide. "She's twisting it. I used her card sometime, sure, but always to pay for things we shared. Groceries, family meals, gas for her own car." Alan cleared his throat from the witness stand, where he had already been sworn in. He adjusted his glasses, leaned forward, and spoke clearly. "As her banker for over 20 years, I can confirm those transactions were not her pattern. They were his. Mrs. Dawson's record-keeping is impeccable. The signatures of fraud are obvious: regular cash drains, same-day redeposits into Mr. Dawson's account. Helping? That's not helping. That's theft." The word hung in the air like a bell toll. Katie shifted in her seat. She had begged to be allowed to testify again, and when her turn came, she rose with quiet dignity. Her voice trembled at first, but then steadied. "I saw him, Your Honor. Dad used her PIN at the ATM. He told me not to say anything, that it was just easier this way. But it wasn't helping. It was stealing." Mark snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she saw." Katie didn't flinch. "I know the difference between helping and stealing." Elena, who had sat stiffly beside her husband until now, suddenly found the floor fascinating. Her hands twisted in her lap, nails biting into her skin. The judge's gaze swung toward her. "Mrs. Dawson," the judge said, Did you benefit from these funds? Elena stammered, her voice barely audible. I. I didn't ask where the money came from, I just. Mark said it was fine. That his mother approved? Her words wilted in the air, brittle and weak. She shrank further into her chair, her sunglasses long since removed, eyes naked with shame. Patricia watched her son's wife crumble and said nothing. She didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than her pen ever could. The judge set down the papers with deliberate weight. Her expression had gone from measured to severe. I see no evidence of confusion on Mrs. Dawson's part. What I do see is a trail of exploitation, with receipts, testimony, and corroborating banking records. Mark tried to speak again, but the judge raised a hand. Enough. The evidence is overwhelming. Patricia sat back down, folding her hands atop her notebook. Her pulse was steady, her breathing even. For decades she had taught children that choices carried consequences. Now, in this courtroom, her son was learning the lesson too late. The next week, Patricia returned to court with a new folder, thicker, heavier. Alan had spent long nights digging, combing through every transfer and cross-referencing accounts that weren't hers. Debbie had pulled digital footprints from login histories. Together, they unearthed more than Patricia had dared hope for. Mark's own secrets, buried under overdraft notices and casino charges. When the clerk called her case, Patricia rose with calm precision, the folder tucked under her arm. The courtroom smelled faintly of dust and coffee, the same way her old office had on exam days, heavy with nerves, anticipation, and the faint sweetness of impending reckoning. Mark sat at his table, pale but defiant. Elena looked less put together than ever. Her expensive blouse couldn't hide the tremor in her hands. Alan stepped to the judge first. Your Honor, in addition to the records already presented, we have traced funds siphoned from Mrs. Dawson's accounts into Mr. Dawson's. He lifted the folder and opened it, laying down page after page. What we found was staggering. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Alan continued, his voice crisp. Mr. Dawson is carrying over $200,000 in gambling debt. He has been using his mother's accounts to mask it, pulling withdrawals, then funneling them to cover losses at casinos and credit cards. A murmur rippled across the gallery. Patricia's hands were folded neatly in her lap, but her pulse thrummed with vindication. For years, she had felt uneasy watching her son's swagger, the money that appeared without explanation. Now the smoke had cleared, and the fire was visible to all. Mark shot to his feet, voice hoarse. That's a lie. That's slander. Alan didn't even flinch. He held up a page of transaction records. On March 12th, $10,000 withdrawn from Mrs. Dawson's account at 2:04 p.m. The same day, $10,000 credited toward a delinquent card under your name at 3:09 p.m. We have 6 months of identical transactions. The judge's expression hardened. Mr. Dawson, sit down. Elena pressed a hand to her forehead. Mark, she whispered, just loud enough for Patricia to hear. Patricia's eyes cut to her daughter-in-law. And as for the boutique charges, she said at last, her voice steady but sharp, those weren't mine either. Alan flipped to another page. Indeed. Thousands spent at shops where Mrs. Dawson has never set foot. All charged to her card, all traced back to accounts in Mrs. Elena Dawson's name. Elena froze. Her breath caught audibly, and her eyes darted toward the exit as if she might flee. The judge's gavel cracked once. This isn't just mismanagement. This is exploitation. The word rang through the courtroom like a verdict already half-spoken. Patricia rose, adjusting her glasses, her notebook balanced against her chest. Old doesn't mean blind, she said quietly. Her gaze never left her son. I saw the patterns. I followed the paper trail. And I will not be silenced. Katie, seated in the back row, couldn't contain the smile that spread across her face. Her fists clenched on her knees not from fear, but from pride. She had doubted whether anyone would believe them. Now, watching her grandmother stand unshaken, she beamed. Mark tried again, his voice cracking. She's exaggerating, she's… The judge cut him off sharply. Mr. Dawson, enough. The evidence is overwhelming. This court cannot ignore such blatant abuse of trust. Patricia sat back down, her body calm but her mind alight with fire. For 71 years she had played roles: teacher, wife, mother. Today she played prosecutor, and the jury was the truth itself. Alan leaned closer, his voice low but firm. You've cornered him, Pat. There's nowhere left for him to run. Mark's hands fumbled through his paperwork, papers scattering like leaves in wind. Elena turned her face away, ashamed, shrinking further into her chair. The judge's pen scratched against her pad, the sound loud in the silence. Then she looked up, her eyes piercing. Mr. Dawson, she said, you've left this court with no choice but to consider restitution and possible criminal referral. The courtroom was hushed as the judge set her pen aside and folded her hands. Her gaze settled squarely on Mark, whose papers still lay scattered in disarray. Mr. Dawson, she said, her voice firm, your petition for power of attorney is hereby denied. The words landed like stone dropped in still water, rippling through the room. Patricia felt her shoulders loosen, the tension that had been coiled there for months beginning to unspool. The judge didn't stop there. Furthermore, this court orders immediate restitution of funds siphoned from Mrs. Dawson's accounts. The exact amount will be determined once the final audit is completed. Mark opened his mouth, but the judge's gavel struck once, silencing him. And let me be clear, she continued, her tone like steel. This matter will be referred to the county prosecutor for investigation. What I see here is not incompetence on Mrs. Dawson's part. It is exploitation, bordering on criminal fraud. Gasps rustled from the gallery. Elena's hand shot to her mouth, eyes filling with tears. She turned toward her husband, her voice a broken whisper. Mark, what did you do? Mark refused to look at her, his jaw locked, eyes fixed on some invisible point on the table, as if sheer stubbornness could keep the walls from closing in. Patricia remained composed, her notebook resting, closed in front of her, hands folded gently atop it. She did not gloat, did not smirk. She had taught discipline for too long to surrender to pettiness now, but in the stillness of her chest, something burned bright. Vindication. Katie slipped from the bench behind her and wrapped her arms around Patricia's shoulders. The girl's cheek pressed against her grandmother's hair. You did it, she whispered, her voice trembling with relief. Patricia placed a steady hand over Katie's, her eyes never leaving the bench. Debbie, legs crossed in the back row, leaned forward just enough to mutter, "Pin him down with paperwork, Pat. It's the oldest trick in the book." Her grin was sharp, her eyes glittering with satisfaction. The bailiff approached Mark's table, collecting the loose documents he had fumbled in vain. Elena finally broke, tears slipping down her cheeks as she shook her head. "I didn't know it was this bad. I thought." Her words collapsed into silence. The judge rapped her gavel one final time. Court adjourned. Chairs scraped as the room began to empty. Reporters whispered to each other, scribbling notes. Alan placed a reassuring hand on Patricia's arm. "He's cornered now. The law's on your side." Patricia nodded, but her gaze stayed fixed on her son. Mark stood rigid, face ashen, fists clenched at his sides. For the first time, she saw not the arrogant boy who mocked her in a bank line, but a man unraveling, his illusions of control ripped away. Katie hugged her again before gathering her backpack, eyes shining. "I'm proud of you, Grandma." Patricia managed the faintest smile, stroking her granddaughter's hair. "I only did what had to be done." As the family filed toward the exit, Mark finally lifted his head, his eyes, bloodshot and furious, locked on his mother's. There was no remorse there, only a dark promise, a silent vow that he wasn't finished. Patricia met his stare without blinking. She had faced defiance before, classrooms full of it, but never with stakes this high. She would not yield, not now. The news traveled faster than Patricia expected. By Monday morning, headlines trickled across Phoenix business circles. Banker's son accused of exploiting elderly mother. Mark's name wasn't printed yet, but the story was unmistakably his. By Wednesday, Patricia sat at her kitchen table with Debbie, sipping tea, when her phone buzzed. A voicemail had arrived, shaky with rage. She pressed play, and Mark's voice spilled through the machine, raw and jagged. "They fired me, Mom. Do you hear me? Fired me. After everything I've done for this family, after all I sacrificed. They threw me out because of you." The message cut off with the sound of something shattering in the background. Patricia reached out and pressed delete. Beep. Silence. Debbie raised her brows, stirring her tea. "Well, that didn't take long." Patricia said nothing, but the faintest smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Mark's dismissal rippled through the community like wildfire. At the grocery store, Patricia overheard whispers. Isn't that Dawson's boy? The one who stole from his own mother? At church on Sunday, shoulders turned. Friends offered gentle touches on her arm, words of quiet support. The shame, finally, was his to bear. Elena did not handle it as quietly. One evening, Patricia sat reading in her armchair when a car screeched into the driveway next door. A door slammed, followed by Elena's voice slicing through the desert dusk. "This is your fault!" she screamed, her heels clicking furiously up Patricia's walk. Patricia set down her book just as Elena pounded on the door. Patricia opened it slowly, calm as stone. Elena stood wild-eyed, mascara streaked, a half-packed duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "You ruined him!" Elena spat. "Do you know what people are saying? They're calling us thieves. I can't even walk into the boutique without whispers." Patricia tilted her head, voice quiet but sharp. "Perhaps you should stop shopping with stolen money." Elena's mouth fell open, her face flushing deep red. She yanked the duffel higher, eyes glittering with hate. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure of it." Patricia only folded her arms. "Easy come, easy go." Elena hissed, spun on her heel, and stormed back down the driveway, her voice carrying into the night. "You're nothing but a bitter old woman." The slam of her car door and the squeal of tires left the street trembling in her wake. The house settled back into quiet. Katie, who had been upstairs, crept down the staircase, eyes wide. "She's gone?" Patricia nodded. "For now." The girl wrapped her arms around her grandmother's waist, pressing her cheek against her shoulder. "He can't hurt you anymore, Grandma." Patricia smoothed her granddaughter's hair, her voice steady. "Not the way he used to." "That's enough for me." Debbie poked her head in from the back door, tablet tucked under her arm, grinning. "Quite the show out there. Better than cable. But don't let your guard down. Cornered animals bite." Patricia nodded, her gaze drifting back to the stack of folders on her table. "That's why I keep my record." The next afternoon, Alan arrived. He set his briefcase down on the table and pulled out a stack of neatly bound documents. His tone was measured, but his eyes carried a spark of pride. "Pat, with the court ruling, now's the time. We should finalize your estate. Clean, airtight, no loopholes. If anything happens, your wishes will stand. No one, not Mark, not Elena, can touch a dime." Patricia rested her hand on her notebook, the paper cool beneath her fingers. She thought of the ATM, of her son's mocking words, of the judge's gavel striking down his lies. She thought of Katie's arms around her. "Yes," she said at last, her voice firm. "Let's finish this." Alan opened the binder, the pen gleaming under the kitchen light. The documents Alan brought weren't just papers, they were weapons. By the next morning, Patricia found herself sitting in the oak-paneled office of Charles Whitmore, her longtime attorney. His shelves bowed under the weight of law books and framed commendations, but the man himself was brisk, practical, and calm as ever. "Well, Pat," Charles said, adjusting his glasses, "it seems it's time to update everything. After the ruling, your son won't be able to challenge it easily. But if you want to be absolutely sure, we make it airtight here." Patricia's fingers tightened on her notebook. "I want it airtight." Charles slid a draft across the desk. "We'll start with your will." Patricia lifted the pen, but her hand paused mid-air. The names she had written years ago flickered in her memory. Mark's, Elena's, once inscribed as heirs to her life's work. It stung to see them there, black on white, like ghosts of trust betrayed. Her pen scratched across the paper with deliberate force, line through Mark, line through Elena. The ink cut them away as cleanly as a guillotine. "Remove both of them," Patricia said. "Permanently." Charles nodded, making his own notes. "Then who inherits?" Patricia's gaze softened. She thought of Katie's fierce little face on the witness stand, the way she'd clung to her at the courthouse. The whispered, "I'm proud of you, Grandma." "Katie," she said firmly, "but with conditions. She has to finish school, high school, and at least 2 years of college. If she doesn't, the funds go to an education trust for local students." Charles arched a brow, impressed. "Practical." Protective Patricia leaned back slightly. For the first time, her lungs filled with something close to freedom. Debbie, perched in the corner chair, smirked. "That's it then. He's locked out forever. He can slam his fists against the vault all he wants. He'll never find a key." Patricia allowed herself a small smile. "That's the idea." The process stretched through the morning. Signatures, initials, notarized copies. Patricia's pen never faltered. Each stroke was both a cut and a healing stitch, severing what had once been an open wound. Alan, who had joined them midway, placed a fresh folder on the desk. Your estate will be beyond contest, Pat. We'll also record a statement of intent, in your own words, for extra protection. Patricia nodded, clearing her throat. Then let me say it now. She folded her hands in her lap, speaking clearly, as if addressing a classroom. My estate belongs to those who respect it. My son and his wife have betrayed my trust, and they will inherit nothing. My granddaughter, who stood by me, will inherit, with the understanding that she honors her education. If she does not, then others with the discipline to learn will benefit instead. Charles smiled faintly. Spoken like the principal you were. Patricia's eyes glimmered. Spoken like the woman I am. By the time the papers were sealed, notarized, and filed, the sun was setting over Phoenix, throwing long shadows across the office. Patricia gathered her purse and notebook, feeling lighter than she had in years. Debbie linked her arm through hers as they walked to the car. You know what this means, right? He can scream, threaten, drag you through mud. Doesn't matter anymore. He's cut off. For good. Patricia exhaled slowly, a deep breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding for months. For good, she echoed. Katie met them at home, bouncing down the steps as soon as she saw her grandmother's face. Well? She asked breathlessly. Patricia reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her granddaughter's forehead. It's done. The name is erased. The future belongs to you now. Katie threw her arms around her, squeezing tight. The envelope arrived 2 days after the will was signed. It wasn't court-stamped or attorney-delivered, just cheap stationery, the kind you'd find at a drugstore, with Patricia's name scrawled across the front in Mark's jagged handwriting. She held it at arm's length for a moment, staring at the uneven letters. The paper smelled faintly of nicotine and sweat, as though it had been written in a haze of anger. She knew better than to open it, and yet, curiosity tugged, sharp as a thorn. Patricia slid a letter opener across the flap. Inside lay 3 pages, covered in words that bled together in a rush of ink. Mom, you don't understand what you've done. I was trying to protect you. I only used your accounts because you weren't keeping up. Elena and I needed the money. You had plenty. You don't get what it's like raising a family today. You've never had pressure like this. She paused, her lips tightening, lies wrapped in excuses. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Do you know how humiliating it was? You turned Katie against me. She doesn't even look at me anymore. You've ruined my marriage. If you cared about family, you'd fix this. All you have to do is call the bank, undo the damage, and we can move forward. If you don't be surprised if this family never speaks to you again. Patricia's hands didn't tremble. She simply turned the page. I'm still your son. You owe me. You raised me. You're supposed to support me, no matter what. I'll give you one more chance to do the right thing. After that, don't blame me for what happened. Her chest grew tight, but not with fear, with anger, and something sharper. She folded the pages neatly, carried them into the living room, and stood before the fireplace. Katie peeked in from the doorway, her voice tentative. Grandma? What's that? Patricia struck a match, touched it to the corner of the letter, and dropped it into the flames. The paper curled, blackening, ink bleeding into ash. That's the right place for it, Katie said softly, stepping closer. The firelight flickered across her face, her eyes reflecting both sadness and relief. Patricia didn't look away from the flames. I'm done with his numbers, his threats, his excuses. Her voice was firm, steady. He doesn't get to write the story anymore. Debbie appeared behind Katie, leaning on the doorframe with her usual smirk. Ashes don't need PINs, she said dryly. For the first time in weeks, Patricia let out a small laugh, quiet, genuine. The sound surprised her, like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. The letter disintegrated fully, flames hissing as they consumed the last of the paper. When the fire finally stilled, only fragile gray fragments remained, scattering with the faintest draft. Patricia felt something inside her loosen, the knot of humiliation and betrayal unspooling into nothing. She closed the fireplace screen and turned to her granddaughter. This house feels lighter already. Katie smiled and slipped her hand into Patricia's. Debbie crossed the room, tapping her shoulder gently. You've done the hardest part, Pat. You've cut him out of your money, your will, and now your head. That's 3 strikes. He's out. Patricia nodded, exhaling deeply. For the first time, she truly believed it. The house still smelled faintly of ash from the letter Patricia had burned when Katie bounded down the stairs one Saturday morning, clutching a wrapped box behind her back. Her cheeks were flushed with nervous excitement. "Grandma," she said, hovering in the doorway, "can you sit down for a second?" Patricia lowered herself into the armchair, folding her hands neatly in her lap. Debbie was already perched on the sofa with her tablet, sipping coffee, while Alan had dropped by with a folder of documents, but paused, sensing something more important was about to happen. Katie crossed the room, set the package in Patricia's lap, and grinned. "Open it." Patricia peeled back the soft tissue paper. Nestled inside was a small jewelry box, handcrafted from warm oak, its lid engraved with delicate numbers. She traced them with her fingertip. 1952, 1974, 1990. Her birth year. The year she married. The year she earned her master's degree. Katie shifted nervously. "I had it made by a local woodworker. I know you've had enough of pins and codes and numbers you don't want to remember anymore, but these felt like the only ones that matter." Patricia's throat tightened. The box gleamed under the morning light, the engraving sharp but tender. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a velvet lining, empty but waiting, like a safe place for what truly deserved protection. "The only numbers that matter," Patricia whispered, her voice breaking just enough to betray her emotion. She closed the lid gently, holding the box as though it were sacred. Debbie cleared her throat loudly, swiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Well, damn it, kid. You went and made me cry." She laughed at herself, shaking her head. "It's beautiful." Alan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His usually reserved expression softened. "That's a stronger pin than any bank could offer. Those numbers can't be stolen. They're yours, etched forever." Patricia looked around the room at the three of them, her neighbor, her banker, her granddaughter, and felt a wave of warmth rush through her, chasing out the last residue of smoke and betrayal. "Family you can trust," she said softly. "That's the real security." Katie's eyes shimmered. She leaned down, wrapping her arms tightly around Patricia's shoulders, holding on as though she'd never let go. Patricia pressed her cheek against her granddaughter's hair, breathing in the faint scent of shampoo and youth, of a future that still had hope in it. The jewelry box rested on her lap, heavy but not burdensome, a reminder that numbers weren't just tools for theft and control. They were milestones, anchors, proof of a life, fully lived. The room sat in silence for a moment, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the desert wind rattling faintly against the windows. Patricia closed her eyes, soaking in the weight of the hug, the gift, the reassurance that what she had fought for had not been in vain. But then the phone rang again, shrill and insistent, cutting through the peace like a knife. Patricia didn't move. She only opened her eyes and glanced toward it, her jaw tightening. Katie's arms tightened around her. Debbie muttered under her breath, "If that's him again, I swear I'll yank the cord out of the wall." Alan leaned back, watching Patricia carefully. "Do you want me to get it?" Patricia shook her head slowly, her hand stroking Katie's back. "No. Whatever he has left to say, it's not mine to hear." 2 weeks later, Patricia sat at her kitchen table once again. But this time, the notebook wasn't open. The ledgers weren't spread across the wood. Instead, a small tape recorder sat in the center, its red light glowing steadily. Across from her sat a young journalist from the Arizona Republic, pen poised, eyes wide with curiosity. "Mrs. Dawson," he began carefully, "you don't have to share anything you're not comfortable with, but people in Phoenix, and across the country, want to hear your story." About how you fought back. Patricia smoothed the front of her blouse, her fingers brushing against the cool oak of the jewelry box Katie had given her, resting close by. "I'm not ashamed," she said. "If it helps another woman lock her doors a little tighter, then it's worth telling." The journalist leaned forward. "And when your son mocked you at the ATM, what went through your mind?" Patricia let the silence stretch before answering, her voice steady, deliberate. "That he believed weakness and age were the same thing. And he was wrong." The interview continued for an hour, questions about her record-keeping, the court battles, the new safeguards she had set in place. Patricia answered each one with measured precision, never dramatizing, never softening. When it ended, the journalist shook her hand firmly. A week later, the article appeared. The headline read in bold across the Sunday edition, "Mother outsmarts son who stole her PIN." The piece spread quickly, carried on local radio, shared online. Neighbors stopped Patricia at the grocery store, not with whispers of pity this time, but with applause. "You're an inspiration, Mrs. Dawson. You showed them all. My mom's reading your story right now. She's changing her passwords." At church, the congregation stood when she entered, nodding with respect. Even strangers offered warm smiles, as though she carried a quiet banner of resilience wherever she walked. Katie was the proudest of all. She clipped the article, framed it, and hung it on the wall above Patricia's desk. "Now everyone knows," she said softly one evening, staring up at the headline. "You didn't just protect yourself. You showed me what it looks like to fight back." Patricia touched her granddaughter's shoulder gently. "You'll never need a pin to know your worth. Remember that." The following weekend, Debbie and Alan joined them for dinner. The scent of roasted chicken filled the house, and laughter mingled with the hum of conversation. Debbie raised her glass halfway through the meal, eyes sparkling with mischief. "Well, Pat," she said, "your name's in the paper, your son's name's in disgrace, and half the city wants you to teach a workshop on digital security. That's what I call a win." Alan chuckled, folding his napkin neatly. Her methods were flawless. Lock down the accounts, document everything, build the case brick by brick. That's not just security, that's strategy. Debbie smirked. "Now that's security." Patricia smiled, serene, her hands resting on the jewelry box that now lived at the center of her table. She thought of all the numbers she had carried, account balances, PINs, court dates, and how heavy they had once felt. "Numbers never scared me," she said quietly, her eyes distant but steady. "People did. And I learned that people can be managed too." The table fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words settling like dust on the desert floor. Then Katie leaned across and hugged her grandmother tight, her voice muffled but fierce. "I love you, Grandma. And I'm so glad you didn't forget your numbers." Patricia laughed, a soft ripple of joy breaking the solemn air. She pulled Katie closer, pressing a kiss to her hairline. Later that night, as the house quieted and the cicadas droned outside, Patricia sat alone in the living room. The jewelry box gleamed in the lamplight, its engraved numbers catching her eye. She reached out, traced them with her fingertip, and whispered to herself, not in sorrow, but in triumph. "My son mocked me at the ATM. Don't forget. Your PIN, old woman." So I changed every PIN he had access to.